Little Nemo is one of those games that I was never really drawn to, for no reason in particular. That's not to say that I didn't play it, because I did. Just not to the extent that my sister did, who, as it so happens, loved this game. Capcom released Little Nemo the Dream Master in 1990, also known as Pajama Hero Nemo in Japan. It's based on the 1989 film Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland, which in turn is based upon the newspaper comic strip Little Nemo in Slumberland, Sans the Adventure, by American cartoonist Winsor McCay, which ran from 1905 to 1914. Now, up until this point where I started to do research for this episode, I had no idea that there was such a lengthy history behind Little Nemo. I mean, I just thought it was a kooky NES game cooked up by some Japanese dude. Hell, Capcom even released an arcade game, but it's a shit sandwich lacking any of the innovation seen in the NES version. But no, turns out Little Nemo the Dream Master is an adaptation of an adaptation, the latter, Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland, being an overly ambitious, overly expensive animated dud that had to compete with Studio Ghibli's Kiki's Delivery Service that same year. Yikes. And even though I've seen Adventures in Slumberland on VHS, I might add, I can't remember a single thing about it. It's also worth noting that the NES game has pretty much nothing in common with the film. The story revolves around Nemo as he traverses through Slumberland via his surreal dreams, the ultimate goal being to rescue the king of Slumberland, Morpheus, from the Nightmare King, who, you guessed it, rules over Nightmare Land. Now, this game could have easily been an ordinary platformer, but what Capcom delivered was something else entirely. Sure, the game takes place in standard side-scrolling 2D levels, and I could say that the vertical nature of many of them is what sets it apart, but where Little Nemo really shines is game mechanics. So right up to the point before you actually get to Nightmare Land, Nemo has no offensive capabilities of any kind, no knives, guns, bombs, or magical dream powers to speak of, but what he can do is throw sweets, which can stun enemies.
Ha! Gay!
Wait, I know what you're thinking, but there's more. While most enemies are stunned by the sweets, there are numerous special creatures strewn throughout Dreamland that when fed sweets will fall asleep, allowing Nemo to use their abilities. Sometimes Nemo rides the creatures, oftentimes he seems to get inside the animal. Each creature has a unique ability. Some will allow you to reach previously inaccessible areas in order to progress through the level, and others just make life a little easier, like bitch slapping enemies with a gorilla. It's a really cool feature and the creatures are nice and diverse. Some of them also have extra health bars, and in most cases you'll need those as the game can be punishingly difficult at times. Of course, save states make it a whole lot easier, but the challenge remains regardless. So initially you'll need to collect keys in order to open a door at the end of each level so that you can progress through the game, and the amount of box locks determines the required amount of keys, some of which are pretty easy to find and others a little trickier. Once you get to Nightmare Land, you'll no longer need to find keys and you'll have a magical wand called a Morning Star, which will allow you to bash enemies or, if you hold down attack, charge it for a magical blast of dream energy, or whatever the fuck it is. Pressing select will allow you to cycle between sweets or the Morning Star. This way you can attack enemies and still feed creatures for their unique abilities. The level design coupled with the special creatures is an extremely clever way to negotiate area denial in a game. You are forced to use special creatures at specific times in order to progress, and it's this mechanic that keeps things interesting. The area denial aspect is also one adopted by the Metroidvania genre, found in modern games such as Hollow Knight and Ori, where you are required to gain specific abilities in order to progress through the game. Kirby's Adventure on the NES adopted a similar creature mechanic by using Kirby's copy ability, where players could inhale certain enemies and gain their abilities, and that's awesome, but Little Nemo did it first 3 years prior, and if you really want to nitpick, one could argue that 1987's Mega Man, with his Robot Master copying abilities, is where it really started. Mega Man also happens to be a Capcom game, just like Little Nemo. So with that in mind, the overall playability and handling of Little Nemo the Dream Master is great. Nemo is nice and responsive, and the creatures for the most part equally so. Occasionally the lizard could be a bit frustrating while moving him from a horizontal to vertical surface, and the gorilla's sluggishness makes him pretty shit. But beyond that, the tight controls are great. exactly what I would expect from an old school Capcom game. While Little Nemo is primarily a side-scrolling platformer, there is a fair amount of verticality to each level that's not always immediately accessible, especially as Nemo. Feed a lizard, mole or hermit crab, however, and all of a sudden you'll be climbing up the length of trees or burrowing into the depths of the earth, opening up a whole new aspect to each level, and these initially inaccessible areas usually hold keys or extra lives to boot. Looking at the visuals, Little Nemo is definitely NES top tier. The sprites are neatly drawn and detailed, and the levels equally so, being extremely vibrant and imaginative, with the dark and creepy Nightmare Land contrasting the light and fluffy levels of Dreamland, really putting the NES color palette to excellent use here. There is also a fair amount of story scenes in this game. It's a wonder how Capcom managed to fit it all onto a single NES cart. With all that said and done, I must say that the most nostalgic aspect about Little Nemo has got to be the music. It's been decades since I last played this game, and Junko Tomiya's, or Gonzao as he's credited in the game, his musical composition is rather fantastic, the title and first level tracks bringing back a flood of pleasant childhood memories as my sister and I attempted to complete this game. I'm not sure if either of us actually managed to do so, however, thanks to save states, I was able to overcome the near Battletoads speeder bike level of frustration that this fucking game dished out at certain points, especially the Nightmare Land levels. Fuck. And speaking of which, it's worth noting that the only time you'll encounter bosses in this game is in Nightmare Land. They are unfortunately uncharacteristically easy and didn't offer much challenge at all. For this reason, the game misses the NES top tier mark in my opinion. I think after playing Little Nemo the Dream Master as an adult, I have a much greater appreciation for this game now. It looks, sounds and plays great, and apart from the disappointing easy boss battles, it's pretty hard to fault this game, so kudos to Capcom. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up, comment, and most importantly, subscribe, and click that bell icon wherever it may be to ensure that you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep playing retro.